Excelente, les dije que era un tema conmovedor cuando hablamos del cannabis y los niños y vemos todos estos testimonios poderosos de cómo el cannabis ha cambiado la vida. Moviéndonos a otro tema muy interesante, el tema de la integración del cannabis y los medios. Cómo mantenerse relevante a pesar de que el tema del cannabis sigue siendo un tabú. Y hay medios que no quieren tocar el tema, hay vehículos publicitarios que no están disponibles, y cómo uno navega ese mundo de la forma más eficaz y costo eficiente. Por el presupuesto publicitario también es importante. El moderador de este panel es José Maldonado, directamente de San Juan, Puerto Rico, periodista puertorriqueño con sobre 20 años de experiencia y fundador de la revista Cannabis.
Buenas tardes.
Alias
El pollo.
De cariño le decimos el pollo. ¿Cómo apreciaste tener contacto con la presencia de Paul Henderson, CEO de High Times Magazine, yes, in the house, cofundador de Big High Pharmacy, donde brindan a los pacientes un acceso seguro a estas medicinas alternativas, y Corey Jones, cofundador de Healing Maps, clínica de terapias alternativas utilizando vitaminas, sales y LSD.
Buenas tardes, gracias Milton. I want to start out, quiero empezar por felicitar a Mimi, a Ingrid y a todo el equipo de LatamCannBiz porque este evento ha estado fenomenal. This is a first class world event y los felicito y le agradezco la oportunidad de estar con ustedes aquí hoy. Welcome to our panelists. We're here to talk a little bit about media, about how we cover these topics that we're, just in Panama starting to get started with. So first of all, I wanted to start with Paul. Talk to us a little bit about, in general, how do you see this cannabis journalism as well as advertising world in this era that we are in now, where states are legalizing, where the countries like this are opening up? What do you see?
Yes, so it's interesting because, we were a magazine that basically, gave the middle finger to the government, right, for many decades. And so we were a counterculture, just trying to provide information. But it was the most basic type of information about cannabis and psychedelics. But now, it's completely shifted, right? Now it's really much more into the details of, medical and what's actually, the research that's going on and how you treat certain symptoms. And it's really getting much more focused on really the education of patients, of consumers. And so, there's been a lot more publications that have popped up, and I think it's great because the more this gets out there around the world, the more people can research it, the more that they really can dig in and understand if they're a patient, how can they treat themselves, how can they treat their own patients if they're a doctor. And so I see it continuing to build and build. I also, it's interesting, of our business verticals, the media vertical is actually by revenue the smallest vertical of High Times, right? You wouldn't expect that, but that doesn't mean it's the least important. It's by far the most important because no matter what else you're doing in cannabis, like for us, it's all about customer acquisition costs, right? And getting eyeballs. And so if you're putting out really good content, you're attracting eyeballs, you're educating the population, then kind of the rest follows.
So you went from a media company basically to cannabis lounges, to cannabis branding itself. What role does the magazine, you're still printing though?
Yeah, so our media business is the printed magazine, online, so digital properties, and then social media. And so we still print 12 magazines a year, maybe the last magazine in existence, but it's still profitable. We've talked about killing it and going all digital, but there's this cult following that when it's sitting on your table, it makes a statement about who you are. The people that are featured in the magazine too still print it and frame it on the wall, so it's a pretty big deal, and so we haven't had the heart to actually move away from printing.
How has it shifted in terms of your audience though, also as well? Because when we're talking medical, we're talking probably about older patients. They might not be that interested also in the culture of what the counterculture, but more on the educational aspect of this plant. How are you working with that? How have you dealt with that?
Yeah, we have different themes of our magazine every year, and so I wouldn't say that every issue we're actually diving into that, but there are certain issues where we spend a lot of time focusing on that, and we also have guest writers that come on for the online publication and provide educational content around more of the medicinal properties.
Perfect. Let me, with Corey. Corey, your vision, you come from, like you mentioned before, you were in Playboy, so you come from a history of publishing. Tell us a little bit about your shift into this market and what you're doing with Healing Maps.
Yeah, being a Playboy, it's sort of a similar brand to iTunes. We talked about killing the magazine. Playboy too is just such a powerful, thought leader. It's the brand flagship. We'll still really, even though it wasn't the financial leader, it was still really important to keep it there. So as we shifted, Playboy, as we shifted Playboy, more digitally, we just kept the essence of the brand and then sort of reformatted it to the way people consume content. It's more visual, a little more fun, a little more digital, for lack of a better word. But what we're doing with Healing Maps is I think a little bit different. I think the cannabis space has overcome some of the stigma a little more than psychedelics has right now. So we're still in the early stages of just educating people and sort of changing their mind and having to reframe the way they think about these compounds. That's kind of what we try to do. We try to build, I think, trust in any kind of stigmatized industry is super, super important. I mean, it's high time to one of the most trusted brands in the space across the facet of cannabis. But with psychedelics, these are very powerful compounds and drugs, and there is a lot of fear around them, a lot of misunderstanding. So we think that we can, keep the content extremely educational, speak to people in a way that they speak to each other too, which I think is really important because there's a lot of studies out there that are very, difficult to understand. They're very medical, they're very research oriented. So we can take those and reformat those and sort of synthesize them in a way that people can understand. I think that's going to go a long way to changing their minds about these plans.
And Healing Maps is a directory. So your business model is you want to drive people to these places. Tell us more about where they're available, where they're popping up. How do you see that map, and how does the content that you're producing complement that? Are you a content company? You're a director? Well, tell us a little bit about that model.
So we're basically both a content media brand as well as a directory. And the reason that we launched Healing Maps is about 3 years ago I understood that came to understand that there's about 1,200 to 1,500 ketamine clinics in the U.S. alone right now, which is a phenomenal number. I mean, we're still in the early stages. I think in 2017 is when it sort of became the FDA gave Spravato sort of a breakthrough therapy status. But we just saw that this huge proliferation of clinics opened up in the U.S. and people didn't understand that it was legal, B, understand that it was very beneficial. There's a lot of research to back that up, and then C, they didn't get treatment right down the street because there's so many of these clinics in the U.S. So we wanted to let people know that those existed, but then we compounded with the educational content. So the educational content is a little bit of where we can kind of grab a little more eyeballs because a clinic, people aren't really aware of them. There's, in terms of search volume, there's really low per clinic, but there's 1,200, so that starts to add up. But in terms of the educational content, we can grab eyeballs, grab audience, and then direct them to the clinic in their area. And that's really our goal, is to connect people who are interested and curious about these therapies with the best treatment clinics in their area. We don't cover anything sort of underground or not run by an accredited person. And so we want to keep all that above board and some of the other places.
And the revenues come from those clinics that are listed. You don't, or are you selling advertising?
We do both. Yes, we want to give everyone sort of a free basic listing. We offer the clinics the opportunity to upgrade their listings and reach more of our audience across not just on the listing page, but as well as threaded throughout the brand and the other ways that we have to use them.
And what about Paul? Let's talk a little bit about social media and restrictions on advertising, because Panama is just opening up. I understand that because here is going to be a medication, it's very limited what you can do in terms of advertising. What has been your experience? Both of you can talk a little bit about that. With social media, what's going on? What do you recommend?
It's still one of the biggest headaches in the space, even for us. And we have 13 million followers across platforms. We're big enough that we won't get shut down, but we'll get shadow banned. So I was even talking to somebody here that they couldn't find High Times Magazine as they typed it into Instagram because you have to type in the whole name and search before it'll come up. So they make it very hard for people to find us, which is very annoying. And then also we're getting like warnings before we post something saying, hey, content like this has been flagged for removal in the past. And this is really going on right now. Right now there's another big crackdown on all social media. And so, we're fortunate because we have a magazine and we have online and we have a name where people come and search out content from us. But, we have a big social following, and so it's important to constantly be posting the articles through social media. And so what we'll find is, we get our hands slapped, and then the next few posts will get very little engagement, like people just won't see it. And so we see that in the numbers, right? And so it's very annoying. We also, the 3 media verticals that I mentioned, it's all advertising revenue, right? And so we used to do a lot of advertising for social, like, hey, we'll make these posts on Facebook and Instagram, and we've had to actually stop that altogether. So we haven't been able to use that as a channel for a while until we feel like things have cooled down. And so it's, you think by now restrictions will be lifted, that this would be much more free-flowing, but we're in the midst of, gotta get another crackdown from Facebook/Meta.
Have you used any of those sites that are supposed to be for the cannabis directed social media? Have you had any luck with that, or have you considered for High Times to develop one of those?
No. I just got pitched a couple weeks ago about a new green link or something that's coming that's a social platform for all things cannabis, and I've seen a bunch come and go, and we've never really got involved. But funny enough is they asked if we wanted to give our name to them to brand it, High Times, and be the social app. It's an interesting idea. I don't know if we're there yet, but we'll see.
Right. Paul, what about you? What is your experience?
Yeah, it's about the same. When it comes to social media, that's probably our secondary or tertiary concern. Not only because of the issues where if you follow the rules, you'll get shut down, but just in a space like this, social media, someone's boss is on there, their mom's on there, and they're hesitant to share that they are about to do a petty treatment or they're going to a psilocybin retreat. So there's that sort of like built-in kind of lack of infrastructure in terms of social media for us. So we tend to just sort of, we work on, we post on there, and we do, we keep them updated, but I'm not really that worried about them right now. I still think it's a few years away before people are fully comfortable to sort of share those experiences.
And here we are in Panama, Spanish-speaking country. I do a Spanish magazine, printing and multimedia. But in the States, that's one of the areas of my interest. The Hispanic market has been underserved, in my understanding. I don't know, what do you guys see in terms of that? Why hasn't that exploded with such a big population and people that know this culture and all that? What are the opportunities there?
I think the opportunities are great. In fact, previous to High Times, I ran a vertically integrated cannabis company out of Monterey County, California, called Grupo Flor. Kind of a Spanish name. It's Salinas is kind of an agricultural part of California. And, we actually saw this and ran into it and thought, why isn't there a Hispanic brand? Why isn't there something catering to kind of the Spanish-speaking community? And so we actually developed a couple of things in our own store there. But it was very microcosm, just a small little snippet. But for 50%, I believe, of California are Spanish speakers, something like that. It was a number that somebody told me. I said, no way, that's impossible. And then I looked it up and I was like, oh my gosh. And so I think it's completely underserved. You're exactly right. We've tried different ways to do the High Times translation into Spanish. We had a gal in Colombia actually doing a lot of our translation into Spanish, and then that kind of fell away, and we've been working on some other solutions. So we're trying to put out as much content, at least in Spanish, as we do in English, but we're still not perfect at it.
Cool. And Paul, in your case?
Yeah, we would love to, but from a clinic and treatment side, this is one of those weird things where the U.S. seems to be sort of ahead of the nation. So when we've seen the proliferation of 1,200, 1,500 ketamine clinics, I think, and everything, the world and the people didn't start jumping off buildings, that's a model that other countries can use. And we've been talking with Danstar guys, that they sort of open up clinics in Brazil. I think that's a huge market. It's just untapped. And I think it's really, really ready to make that leap.
And how important is, what do you consider our role to be as media persons, as educators? I mean, in my case, for example, the having a print magazine, I've seen the effect of people that grab it in their hands, especially for older patients. You know, they've seen something on stuff on the internet, people have talked to them, but that holding it in their hands and seeing it in that format has been very powerful. What do you think about that role that we play as communicators?
Well, I mean, I think it's critical what you're doing, what we're doing, El Planteo, what they're doing. I think the more information, the more journalism that gets out there is the better, right? It's people, like we saw in the last panel, is just simply people looking for solutions maybe for a sick child, and they stumble upon the magazine or the online article that happens to talk directly to them and what their issues are. And so information is king right now, and so I just think we have to continue to put out as much content as possible.
And for us, it is paramount that we make sure that our information and our content is above board and real. We're in the medical space a little bit more. And so we have a board of medical doctors who approve the content and ensure that if we say something that is related to some sort of medical component, that it's correct. And these things change, these things evolve as more research is done. But I think it's really, really key to not spread misinformation and disinformation around this. You know, when you're in an emerging sort of medical market the way we are, you really have to build a trusted brand for someone to, you know, make sure that they're getting the right information and that they can convey it to the people that they talk to. Because there's a lot of word of mouth in this space too, because of social media and not being a big component of it. And so just making sure that they can trust what you say. At the end of the day, you build that, it'll be successful.
And let me ask you, we have a lot of company owners here, people from the industry. I find that, and even in Puerto Rico, we have so many companies, sometimes they're very shy in terms of what they put out there from their companies and even their products, obviously because of retaliation. But give them some tips on how to pitch stories to you guys.
Keep beating us over the head. And we get hit from a lot of different directions, and there's a lot of really good things that come at us. But sometimes it just doesn't fit into the cycle of what we have planned for the next many months, right? So we do an art issue and we do a tech issue. And so somebody has something very interesting to talk about and pitch stories to us, but for the magazine specifically, it just doesn't fit into the calendar yet. So we just need to continue to be reminded, yes, it's a good story, we'll get back to it. Doing an article actually online is easier. We publish multiple articles a day, and so it's much easier to kind of get into that cadence, which is just a different person that runs that. And so if you get in touch with them, it's a little bit easier to get online and get an article published with a writer. So generally, our heads of content will, if they think it's a great story and somebody pitches to us, we'll just connect them with one of our writers, and then they'll do an interview and then they'll write up a story. I do think that there's going to be a lot more coverage on, Central, South America, Latin America, everything going on right now. And one of the reasons I'm here, I got involved with a co-op here around the hemp space 2 years ago with a gentleman in Jorge. And I just randomly 2 years ago through a friend, and I put money in, and I thought it was interesting. I thought it just made total sense. And now I'm here 2 years later talking about the passage of medical cannabis in Panama. It's amazing. I was in Colombia 4 years ago learning about that market. I lived in Brazil for 2 years back in my early 20s, and it's exciting to see that market as it might evolve shortly as well. So anyway, incredibly exciting, and would love to hear all the stories that are happening in this part of the world.
Paul, any tips?
Yeah, one of the most important lessons I've learned when I launched the digital brand 18 years ago is just because you write it, no one's going to care at the end of the day. So the one question our internal kind of like litmus test was, would I send this to a friend? That was it. If the answer was yes, then you knew you were on something. When if you're going to pitch us, anyone else, any kind of magazine, digital brand, anything, if the answer is yes, I would send it to a friend. brand, there's a great chance that the editor would be interested in
Perfect. And how do you see, in terms of the future, what do you see 5 years from now in terms of the space for marketing and for these companies? In the case of Panama, they're going to be exporting. How do we as communicators help them reach those patients, reach those markets?
I think we just have to continue to tell the story, because I think that there's just a lot of confusion around once you start talking about imports and exports. Some countries allow it, some countries don't. What do they allow to be exported? What does that mean for the country that imports it? What are they making? So it's just this hodgepodge of different regulations around the globe that is, for the person that's not in it every day, like many of us, it just becomes very confusing. And so I think we'll continue to kind of expand on what a global supply chain looks like, and really just try and cover it and let people know that, hey, this is what's happening. These are the types of products being made, and here's ultimately where you can find products.
Yeah, and for us, it's just more the education. I think there's going to be expanding compounds, whether it's engineers or psilocybin that come on board as well, and even beyond. We're not even sure where it's going to go exactly, but we know that it's most likely going to expand instead of contract, and just make sure that people have awareness of what is legal, where it's legal, and how it's legal, and the benefits too, and also the drawbacks. It's really, really important. It shouldn't just be sort of like everything's not rose-colored. These are important, very powerful compounds that should be used in sort of specific ways in terms of the medical component. And so, not shying away from that, I think is going to be really important as this whole industry evolves.
Let's talk a little bit about.
I'll say one more thing. A lot of people don't know our first issue in 1974 on the cover was actually a mushroom, not cannabis. So High Times actually started much more around psychedelics. It just so happened that in like the 90s, High Times as a magazine doubled down on just covering cannabis, so people know us as a cannabis publication. But our February issue this year was, mushrooms on the cover again. So as we look into the future as well, we're going to start to be covering a lot more of the psychedelics. Maybe not from as a medicinal perspective as you guys, but just kind of what's going on in the space. And so it's really interesting to see that come back all these years later.
Interesting. As an editor, I'm interested in as well. In my journey, like Mimi said, I come from a business journalism background. I've been covering all types of other industries. How are you staffing? How are you finding the staff? How big is your staff? How are you finding journalists in this new type of journalist? Any tips for me, actually?
We're actually incredibly lean. We have a VP of content that oversees kind of the 3 media channels I mentioned, and then we just have one head of each one of those: social, online, and the magazine. And then from there, all the writers are freelance, and they're all paid by article as they're written. And so, we try out a lot of different people. We have a lot of guest writers, and so we kind of see, style and how fast they can turn around a story. And so that's about it. We only have a handful of people in each one of those categories that are doing all the work. And it used to be much, much larger, but as the world has changed and advertising dollars, media have come down a little bit, we just had to kind of pivot, and we'll see. And to be honest, I just had a conversation recently around kind of AI writing articles, and we're not even paying somebody. So I hate to say that because it takes jobs away, but you can kind of throw in a whole bunch of information, and then you'll actually see auto-generated articles come out of it. I don't think it's the best thing for us to be doing right now. That's why I said no, because I think you need a level of expertise of people that have been in this space for long enough to actually articulate the right message. But it's interesting in the future, maybe articles will start to be written by bots.
Wow, that's awesome. What about you?
Yeah, we're leaner than that as well, but primarily freelancers. But the way that we look at freelancers, we want to make sure that they have a vetted voice in the space. There's a history of them writing high-quality content about it, whatever topic we're writing about. We also love to have doctors and experts and people who have some sort of accreditation to write about a topic, especially if it's medically focused. That's not just one of those things that Google likes. They want to make sure that if you're getting someone medical advice, it's written by someone who actually knows what they're talking about. So that sort of gravitas, I think, is one of those things that we always try to look for in a writer.
In the case of high times, also in the States, we're seeing all these celebrities getting into the cannabis market, and it's become a more of an entertainment kind of thing. In some sort of sense, how do you balance that coverage, and how do you decide which artists are on the cover? Tell us a little bit more about how that coverage has changed. It's a mixture of entertainment, consumption, and
so it's important to note that we consider ourselves a bit more like a lifestyle brand, and so, we're not specifically like medical focus, like healing bags. And so there is a, kind of like a rolling stone, right? It's around music, but there's a lot of different things that cover. So we're focused on kind of cannabis, psychedelics to a lesser extent. We cover a lot of really interesting just topics, right? Music and art. And on the covers, we've actually gone away from faces and personalities on the covers because there's so many issues with wanting to replicate that cover in the future, and we don't own the IP and having to pay a state. So everybody wants to put a t-shirt and make a t-shirt that has the High Times cover of Bob Marley, but working with their estate is just very difficult, and so we just won't even won't even approach that. So it's just a long-winded way of saying we're not really doing that anymore. You guys will see that we're doing a lot more pictures of bud or oils on the covers of the magazine, really sticking to the content.
Awesome. In the case of psychedelics, do you see artists coming into this field and what do you call it? Entertainmentization, farandulización, we call it in Spanish.
Aaron Rodgers 2 weeks ago came out and said that he became a better football player because of taking ayahuasca. That is unheard of right now. The fact that he's one of the most famous players who's still actively playing, which is so rare. Normally these people come out years after they're out of the league. But for him to come out and say that, it just opens up such a conversation. Sports Illustrated then covered it, as there were a couple of other athletes, and they covered it in the framing of, will this make athletes better? And this is, it's amazing how quickly both of these topics have moved in the last decade. I think, psychedelics in the last 3 years, it's really kind of ramped up. Cannabis in the last 10. But the social acceptance is just accelerated so much, it's beyond what I thought.
Definitely, and it's changed the whole perception on the plant or on the psychedelics itself. It's amazing. We got in Singapore, Miami, when that conference for psychedelics recently, and I was amazed. I learned so much in one day. I didn't know all this was going on. And again, that kind of knowledge, which is more technical, that's also a challenge of how to get it out there, right? In terms of how you're producing that content. For the producers themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. It's a balance because you want to, you don't want to just keep pumping out like medical articles, right? You want, like today we were supposed to one about someone's story. We want people like human stories of someone going through an experience, whether it's psilocybin or ketamine or ibogaine, telling their story, and then talking about how to improve them. Because when we talk about stigma, I think when someone sees someone who looks like that, go through it, and tell that story, that is extremely much more powerful than any kind of like keyword optimized medical article you're going to come up with. And I think that incorporating that in the videos is going to be a big component too. Because people see that, it peels away the onion of the stigma and the fear, and they just don't understand what it's going to be. But if people see it, and then they see it afterwards, it's really, really powerful.
All right, well, we're rounding up, but I wanted to ask you, what's your vision for what's happening in terms of regulation in the States? It's taking longer than people thought. You're in there every day. What's going on? Give us a little bit of an insight of what's going on.
Well, I've been in the space in California mostly for about 7 years, and I gave myself a 5-year time horizon. Well, for sure, I thought it would be federally legal. So here we are, all those years later. I still don't see it. I don't see for cannabis there being a federal legalization bill. I see there being a descheduling of cannabis from Schedule 1 and just removing it and allowing the states to continue doing what they're doing. But I also don't see interstate commerce or shipping from California to New York anytime soon. Even if that were to happen, I think the states will kind of put up their own barriers. Some states maybe will have packs, Oregon, Colorado, Nevada, Oregon, California, Nevada, California, where you might see shipments across state lines, but not all over the country. And I wish it would move a lot faster. It's frustrating because, as we've heard many times, I'm an illegal drug dealer, per se right now. My parents still don't tell me what I do. So, one day maybe they will, and they'll be proud.
Well, I think we're rounding up. I want to thank both of these gentlemen for being here today. I'm so honored to have shared this stage with you. And again, thank you to the LatamCannBiz for having us. You guys keep enjoying yourself.